in astrology, just looking at the moon of each person, you know, what the lunar needs are, really can explain a lot, because one person's moon might be very private, very self-contained. They might need a lot of space to process things, to process emotions, while the other person's moon might be quite touchy-feely and might need that reassurance of touch, and or another moon might need a lot of verbal communication. So even just understanding that, of what brings comfort to each person, what feels emotionally supportive, can help us really to understand that person in our life, and understand that sometimes we may reach out to others to help them in the way that would soothe us rather than how would soothe the other person. And that's very important as well with parent-children dynamics, because parents can sometimes feel like they're not meeting their child's need, or the child might feel the parent isn't really hearing what they need. So explaining that to parents, you know, about their children, can really help them to set aside temporarily their own needs in order to be more present for their children's needs. And again, that it's not personal to the parent.
Right. And it's that development of awareness, and being able to say it's looking at a puzzle and having more of the information, so as an individual we can understand our needs and how we communicate, and also being able to have those, oh, this person I care about, whether it's a parent or a friend or a loved one, you know, being able to say, now I better understand where you're coming from and how you see the world, and we can really learn how to dance together.
Exactly. And, you know, people sometimes ask me, am I compatible with another sign? And I always say, first of all, there are some charts that are, we could say, easier to fit together, but all that means is that there's less work involved in understanding each other. But there is no such thing really as incompatibility. There are just some charts that need more bridges. And it depends whether both people, and that means both of you, really have the energy, the time, the awareness, the willingness to do the work that's involved, which is really, you know, part of the work we go through in couples therapy. We're saying to people, you know, you may love each other, but you also have, you know, are you willing to put the work in to create these bridges? And I think that's where astrology becomes very literal, because you can show people where the bridges need to be created and what needs to be done to create those bridges. And then it's up to the couple, the individuals in the couple, whether, you know, and a lot of it depends also on developmental stage in life, you know, where people are at, and also not to ignore external circumstances, because often we talk about as if everything is possible if you're just willing to do it. Well, if you're in the middle of, you know, dealing with basic poverty, or in a situation of war, conflict, or
pandemic.
Exactly. Then the circumstances impact everyone. And we all know how that's very, very, you know, impacting everyone in different areas of the world in different ways. Because if people are financially very wealthy, that gives them different choices than if they're living in the middle of somewhere where really they don't have the financial resources to deal with basic survival needs. So that's very important. I think sometimes as therapists, sometimes as astrologers, we forget that bigger picture, and it's very important to consider that.
Yeah, and I think for clients as well, remembering it, and it's also not, whether it's astrology or whether it's psychotherapy, it's not a magic wand. And a lot of times people will come in and say, well, do you think there's hope? Do you think we should just give up? Do you, you know, what do you suggest? And it's like, well, I haven't lived the relationship. I don't know. Like you said, I don't know what you're willing to put in. I don't know what obstacles you're overcoming. And I don't know, you know, what you're both willing to negotiate on, but I'll do my best to help you.
Absolutely. And the chart, you know, gives me the bare bones. It tells me the core of the person, you know, and I think that's one of the advantages of using astrology with psychotherapy, is that it goes right to the core very quickly. Now, I have to be very careful with that, because I cannot let that influence how I'm listening to the client, because the client has their version of their chart. And so when a client gives me, a psychotherapy client gives me permission to use their astrology chart, and I do get written permission from them to use it or not, what I do is I use it in the background to have some idea of what the energies are doing in their chart at the moment, what the transits are doing. So what's being woken up in their chart at the moment. But that doesn't mean I necessarily bring that into the room with me. I have it at the back of my mind, but I need to be guided by the client and where they're at. But it can kind of be useful in terms of timing sometimes. For example, if somebody's going through a period of feeling very, very depressed, very low, when I look at the transits, I have an idea of whether this is something that's potentially long-term, or if this is something that's pretty quick in passing, and that can help inform me. But again, I am predominantly informed by the client and where they're at.
Okay. Now, for someone who's never experienced astrology or worked with an astrologist, what would that look like if someone was to contact you and say, "Hi, Margaret, I'd like to come in and work with you"? What does that process look like?
Well, if they're coming for just purely astrology, then they would come for a birth chart reading. That would be the first stage. So I would spend time going through all of their chart, the basics of their chart. Also looking at what are the transits waking up now, because our chart is static. It's like a photograph of the sky at the time we're born, a symbolic photograph, but the planets are still moving around and waking up different parts of the chart. So I'm looking at what stage are they in and what developmental stage are they in, and what is the global picture and how is that impacting them. And usually about every maybe 6 months or once a year, it depends on different people, or sometimes a little more often, depends what's going on in their lives, they'll come back to me and then we will look at, okay, what's happening at the moment with the planets? What are you in the midst of right now? And what are some ways you can navigate these movements of the planets, from the standpoint of your chart? Because you see, our chart is a little bit like the glasses we wear. We see the world with those glasses. And understanding the glasses we wear really helps us to know, okay, what are my strengths? What are my resources? And what are the things I might find a little bit more challenging?
And what is the process like? Is it a long process? Is it something that you can do over the phone? And I'm just thinking of, if someone was interested or wanted to connect with you to get their work done, like, does it have to be in person? Can it be over the phone or through Zoom? What are the options?
Well, to be honest, a lot of my work is online through Zoom. I mean, and that was even pre-COVID, because I have a lot of clients in the US and other countries. So in Ireland, people tend to prefer to come in person. I'm not fully sure why that is. I think maybe there's less familiarity with online work. I think now everybody's used to Zoom, so I think that will change. So a lot of it is online. The initial reading is usually about an hour and a quarter. And then follow-on readings are usually about 45 minutes to an hour. I also do a lot of work with couples. So I do relationship readings, either with one person on behalf of both of them, or ideally with both people on Zoom to look at the relationship charts. Then I look at the separate charts. I look at the charts together. It's a little bit like those old camera. Do you remember those old photograph negatives that you put one on top of the other?
Yes.
And then I look sometimes at the composite chart, the chart of the relationship itself. So that's really what I would do, and then later look at the transits. So that's usually the process. If I'm working with it in psychotherapy, I just do all of this work in the background.
And sorry, someone was just asking a question.
Sure.
I'm going to jump to it if that's okay. Most psychoanalytic theory has the concepts of unconscious and resistance. What are these? How are these demonstrated in charts?
The unconscious, the whole chart can be unconscious, basically. Usually the transpersonal planets in charts are less conscious because they're further away, and depends what age we are. Usually until midlife, we're a little less conscious of the energies of Pluto, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. So usually from midlife onwards, we become a little more conscious. We can integrate them a little more. Some people can remain unconscious all their lives. It's no different than, you know, when you're looking at people in terms of therapy. That's a question of where people are at. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Where do you see resistance?
Usually people where there's a lot of resistance, people are unlikely to even come and have their chart read, really.
Or come into therapy. Right. Yeah. Right. Because I think there's, I don't know so much about in Ireland, but I know in the States growing up, and this is something when I'm teaching or when I'm working with clients, there's so much negative publicity out there for the human service fields. You know, in media, in movies, it's a rarity to see a good demonstration of a therapist. And I don't know if you've experienced that in Ireland as well.
Well, Ireland has been very slow. I mean, you know, when I did my MSW, I won't even say how long ago it was. It was a very long time ago. When I came back to Ireland, counseling and psychotherapy didn't exist here. So I was lucky enough to get a job in a mental health day center. And because I was the only social worker, because that was the only label for me there, I actually was given free rein, and I used to run therapeutic groups and do one-to-one counseling and so on, but a lot of the other staff didn't really have a clue what I was doing, nor did my supervisor at the time. So it's taken a very long time for counseling psychotherapy to develop here. And it's still seen with a little bit of stigma. It's like, what's wrong with you? You have to be really desperate before you go. So the whole kind of, I guess, viewing counseling as an enriching process of individuation, separation, development of self, really hasn't quite reached Ireland fully yet. It's still seen a little bit as like, you need to go and get yourself fixed. And I think there's still a lot of confusion between psychiatry and psychotherapy. I think that's another thing. And you know, it's a work in progress in Ireland in terms of also people's training and, you know, also kind of people have had some pretty negative experiences here because not everybody is fully skilled and trained in Ireland yet. Yeah. So that's all changing, but it's a little bit unfortunate. And certainly from anybody from a minority group, you know, LGBT, you know, also, you know, there's been homophobia, quite a bit of homophobia, racism. There's still quite big issues to tackle in the psychotherapy counseling world here. So I do know quite a few people who have been pretty much put off with good reason.
That's so hard when sometimes when you're doing therapy, you're trying to heal the wounds of previous therapists.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, I'm very lucky to be attached to a therapy center called City Therapy in Dublin in Dame Street. That's excellent, you know, and that really has amazing therapists there. So I have to say I'm fortunate. I just want to mention that, you know, but I think there are some people in private practice, you know, who are not so great. And then there are some wonderful people, but it's a little hit and miss.
Okay. And so if someone wanted to come and work with you, and you were telling me like getting their chart done, and they were seeing you for psychotherapy, how much, and they were, you know, they're like, Margaret, you can pull from my chart as much as you want to. How long does that play into the therapy? Does it become an integral part of the treatment plan, or is it more just kind of a component of what you're working on and how you address issues?
You know, I would, again, it would go into the background, you know, mostly. It would depend. For some people, it may be that we use the transits to guide us, if that's what they'd rather do. If they're very astrologically minded, they might prefer the focus to be on the astrology, but I use my therapy skills amidst that. For people who are less astrologically minded, I would really more focus on the psychotherapy, because bringing a lot of astrology into a psychotherapy session really can help. It almost removes people from the emotions into the mind. You know, it's more of a cerebral process, and that's not what I want to do in a therapy session.
Right.
So it's really more, again, as I say, in the background, unless some people really enjoy astrology and want astrology, and so they ask me, look, I'm feeling like this, is there anything in my chart that's going on? And then we can use that as a bouncing off ground.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, you know, your biggest approach is how do you connect to the partner, or to the client, and create that strong therapeutic alliance and see how you can work together to address whatever issues they're dealing with. And you just happen to have an amazing resource with their astrology chart.
Mostly, yes. And then sometimes when it starts from astrology, it stays mostly in astrology with counseling with it. But it depends how people come to me, you see, because some people will come just for psychotherapy and some for astrology, and then one blends into the other. So it all depends what the starting point is.
Okay. And what are some questions that you normally get when people are trying to figure out, well, you know, what is astrology? What do I do with it? How is, you know, what are some common questions or issues that you encounter?
A lot of people really want to know their life purpose. You know,
Okay.
what am I here to do? Am I doing a job that fits me, or I'm really unhappy in my job? You know, what should I retrain? What should I do? Sometimes, you know, questions about, a lot of questions about relationships, you know, a lot of issues around relationships. Sometimes about the past, you know, how is the past affecting the present? You know, what am I carrying with me? What are the unresolved issues? And astrology can be quite helpful in looking at some of the parental issues that we often carry with us into our adult life. So those are kind of really, life purpose is probably the big one that would draw a lot of people. Particularly, people tend to come to astrology often when they're at a crossroads, you know, when there's really a time of making decisions and thinking, I'd love some help to clarify some of these different paths I might go down. Also, I get a lot of clients who are opening up to their intuitive gifts, to their psychic gifts, who don't quite know what to make of it, who think maybe they're imagining it, who are a little nervous about it. So yeah, I've clients have come to me for years with that. You know, it's a very interesting one that doesn't, it's not the presenting problem, or not, it's not a problem, not the presenting issue, but it often comes up during the session.
Okay. I'm just digesting it. It's so interesting to me. Like, I just love this. It's so fun just to, you know, to learn about it. And like I said, you know, growing up, it was, you just got a negative flavor for it, at least in my experience in the States. Like, it was one of those things that you would see in the movies of, you know, there's always a blending. And it's interesting that you brought up the intuitive piece, that an astrologist is a psychic and they'll tell you what to do a lot of people, I guess, what is the flow there of people who say they're psychic or have intuitive abilities, and the correlation with astrology? Because astrology is more of a science, correct, in my understanding? Like, you have to be trained in it, and
It's neither a science nor an art. It's always this big debate of what is it. It's a symbolic tool.
okay.
I think anything that's symbolic falls into the metaphysical arts, really. And so that's where the scientists are a little bit skeptical, because astronomically the chart is not really correct. But it works. And I always say to people, try it out. If it works, it works. And I think, you know, there's a fine delineation between astrology and intuitive psychic gifts. And it's, you know, for some people, looking at the chart opens a door into something else. And I really think many of us who are astrologers also work with our intuition. However, I think it's very important to have a very solid background with astrology, because we're not offering people a psychic reading. I think for anybody who's doing that, and that's a very valid tool also, that's very different. That's what people are going for. But I think with astrology, they're coming to us for information on their astrological chart. So it's basically, how I would describe it is that as astrologers, it's important that we have the training. And that means a lot more than just a couple of weekends, but pretty rigorous training, that we understand the language of astrology, that we keep ourselves up to date like anything else. And then when we're in the session, that we trust our knowledge enough that we can almost let that go and then let the information be as it is. So I think it's kind of an interesting blend where the symbols also open us up maybe to something more. But I think, we need to be very, very clear with clients what we're offering them is an astrological reading. But I do think many astrologers are also working from intuition. But it's important, as I say, to have the knowledge there.
Mm-hmm. I think so. And just like in psychotherapy, you just want to have those healthy guidelines cleared out. Informed consent. When someone's coming in, they know who you are, what your training is, what your background is. And when I was learning that in grad school, and then when I entered the field, I realized how important that is, because I'm asking someone to trust me.
Yes.
And whatever their experiences are, if they can see where I've studied, they can see my education, they can see my experience, and then they'll know what questions they may have for me and different things like that. And I'm assuming it's similar to you and your experiences, where when they see the validity of the work that you've done, because I know you also provide education and teaching in astrology, correct? Which is so amazing, and I love that. And I see your posts and your social media, and it just looks so fun and educational. And we can get to that in a minute. But definitely looking at when someone comes to see you, you've done the work. You are specializing in this because you believe in it.
I think absolutely. And I think, people don't often realize that the actual session itself is only a tiny proportion. A lot of the work goes into preparing the chart beforehand. So I'll spend a minimum of a couple of hours preparing somebody's chart before I do a reading, because I really want to make sure I've covered everything. That doesn't mean that I present all of that to them on the day, because it depends where they're at. And I often tell this funny story. I mean, it wasn't so funny at the time, but my very first reading, when I was just finishing up, my very first reading that I charged for, I had a mountain of work prepared. I mean, I had literally something this size, and the person came and sat in front of me and didn't say very much. So the less this person said, the deeper I went, thinking, I'm not touching anything. At the end of the session, I was like, it was about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I just kept going on. And the person burst into tears. And I thought, oh my God. And then the person told me that they had just come out of rehab the day before.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, of course, I sat them down, gave them a cup of tea, apologized, so on. But it was a huge lesson for me, really, in, it's not about me putting across what I've prepared. It's really tuning into the person, where they're at,
right,
and why they're there. And
right,
often the reason they're there, I found, also isn't necessarily the reason that they've told me initially or that they've emailed me about. So part of the process, and that's where psychotherapy is very useful, is really gently assessing, what does this person really want right now? And how can I facilitate them feeling safe enough and comfortable enough to tell me that, and so that I can give them a reading that is absolutely tailored to their needs, rather than what I think is really interesting in their chart and exciting, and oh my goodness, there's so much, let me tell you more and more and more, So that was a very humbling lesson first time round. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those pieces, especially working with couples, you almost just have to set that stage, like creating a secure environment. Because if someone's coming to you, like you said, there's usually been something that's happened. Like someone once taught me that pain is the best teacher. So there's been some sort of pain to move us, of saying, all right, I need to learn, I need to grow, I want to do better in this area, so I'm going to reach out for help. And yes, we have the skills, we have the knowledge, but if we don't have that alliance with people, we're not going to be able to do anything.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely key, and going at somebody's pace, going at the client's pace, not our pace. It's the client's pace. So it's always client-led. And I think that's what both astrology and psychotherapy have in common, that it needs to be client-led. We do the work, we do the preparation. Similarly with psychotherapy, we do the research, we do, we think about it and so on. But ultimately, what the client brings into the room there and then, that's what we're working with.
Mm-hmm. And validating that in the clients, that there isn't any judgment, that there's no right or wrong, and our role isn't to judge them, but to provide insight and observation, and to be able to help them identify where they want to go and how we can find different ways to get there.
Absolutely. It's all about, it's self-work. We're all working on ourselves. Nobody else is doing the work for us. So we're just kind of helping people navigate the territory. That's really what it's about.
And it must be, I'm just going back to this, it just must be so interesting with a couple to see that and just have that conversation of, a lot of times in my couple work, we call it the blame game of, oh, you do this, you do that. And if we take that out, in emotional focus therapy, we call that cycle, identifying the negative cycle, and really helping clients see who they are as individuals in a loving, compassionate way. Because we all have our baggage, like you're saying, we all have our own wounds and our own successes, and being able to explore those in a really loving and safe way is so imperative to someone's healing.
I love seeing that in couples work, and I think astrology is an amazing tool for relationships. I think if people knew more about what it could do, I think they would really use it much more. The great thing in couples therapy is when, individuals turn to each other and say, oh, so it's your Mercury. That's why you kind of, talk so much or talk so little, or, you seem distracted. It's not that you don't care about me or you're not listening to me. And the other person is like, yeah, did you really think I didn't care about you or whatever? And when that penny drops and they can see it, and I can explain to them, well, your Mercury, is in Gemini, so you love lots of ideas and you talk very quickly, and your partner's Mercury is in Pisces, so when they get upset they can't even find the words, and they're like, oh, I thought you were sulking, and they're like, no, I couldn't even find the words, I couldn't even get, and suddenly they become like, they see these characters in their chart, these personalities, these different parts themselves, and they really get on board, and they say, well, what can I do to help you? Can I help your Mercury? And the other person might say, yeah, just give me a little bit of time to process it. And they're like, yeah, sure. And then we'll talk about it later. And it takes away that pain of like,
and that confusion.
Yeah, because the bottom line is our fear is the other person doesn't love me. They don't cherish me. They don't value me.
I don't matter.
That's very rarely the case, as you and I know from our couple work. It's a lot of other things, and communication, meeting emotional needs, those are crucial, and those can really be explained so easily through the chart.
Right, and even as you're saying it, just thinking of the people I've worked with who don't even have that vocabulary. Like, how can I tell you what I need when I don't even know? I've never been taught that that's a need. I just know that pain is there, and I'm trying these different ways that may not be working, but I'm still trying.
Yes. And I think to be able to break down, to explain somebody's needs in terms of their moon, and say, your moon is in water, you're somebody who really needs emotional empathy. You need a partner who says to you, how are you feeling? You don't need them to make you dinner or to clean the house or to do the shopping or buy you a gift. You just need them to sit down beside you and say, how are you feeling? And you suddenly see the relief in their face. They say, yes, that's exactly what I need. I just don't know how to explain that. And the other person is like, that's kind of easy. If I know that, I'm happy to do it.
I can do that. Yeah. I can do it. Yay. Yeah. Winning.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the wonderful thing. And I think also for couples who have broken up to kind of sometimes look back over the charts with their ex or whatever, and to be able to explain things again, depersonalize and say, this has nothing to do with you. Look, they were going through this enormous transit. This was going on. They needed space to be themselves. They needed freedom. It wasn't about not loving you. It's just, this is their time to become who they are, or this is their focus is on career right now. So, you know, the aim ultimately, I think, for all of us as therapists or counselors and astrologers is to really alleviate some of the pain in the world that's unnecessary, because there's a lot of pain that we can't do anything about. We cannot stop, you know, people dying. Well, we could stop people dying of hunger, but individually we can't do that. You know, it's bigger than us. But there are smaller things in our daily life that if we understand, if we have an understanding of, it makes such a difference. It can bring such a sense of relief and really take away some of that angst. Just remove a little piece of it. And I think that's really what this business is about for all of us.
Yes, and helping people just to also know they're not alone in this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think moves
and that
mountains.
we're with them. We can help them figure it out. You know, that they've got some support in figuring it out.
As someone once called me what was the phrase? The relationship translator. And I'm like, oh, I love that. The relationship translate, but it's also, people have to remember, because we're not in it every day. We're not in that fog. We're not in that heaviness. We are able, and that's part of why our job is so important, is because we can be that objective person in your life.
And I think that's what the astrology chart gives. It gives an objectivity. It puts it on paper. It's like you put two charts side by side, and it's like these two people see who they are side by side, and it's on paper, so it removes it from that immediate dynamic. And something happens in that, in externalizing it, which allows some air, some breath, some space to come into the equation. Because we all know when couples are kind of, you know, in that kind of locked in syndrome, there is no space. And so the astrology gives them space where they're both looking at something. And it's a little bit like the work you and I do with EFT, where we're looking at the cycle. And that in itself removes it, depersonalizes it from you're doing this and you're doing this. No, you're both actually wanting to work together to change this cycle. And it's the same with astrology, looking at the composite chart, which is the chart of the relationship itself. How can we both as individuals make the best of this relationship and make it the most loving relationship we can? And then both people are together, they're on the same side, rather than, you know, being polarized.
Right, and I think sometimes in going into what you were talking about of how it is in Ireland, and I can still see it in the States as well, as that resistance to whether it's astrology or psychotherapy or couples work, that I'm afraid someone's going to judge me. I'm afraid someone's going to tell me, going to make me feel something I don't want to feel. They're going to make me do something, or I am afraid they're going to try to make me be someone I'm not. And in the EFT, you know, one of the opportunities I offer here are the Hold Me Tight workshops. And one of the most beautiful parts of that is it's not really therapy, but it's about a chance for couples to get out of the world and to be able to develop their relationship with themselves and their partner. And the feedback is just wonderful of, I forgot how much I loved my partner, or I forgot, you know, man, how did our relationship get put on the back burner time and time and time again? And how can I not, and one of the things that I always try to reassure is, when you come into my office or someone else's office, it's not about changing who you are. It's not about making you another person. It's about helping you find the ways to let that stress not be absorbed, or that worry or that anxiety. So everything you're working so hard for, you can actually enjoy.
Absolutely. And how to create a bridge between you and this other person that you love, you know, a bridge that isn't, you know, a stressful one, that it's literally a bridge you can walk back and forth over. And so that you can bridge these differences, because we fall in love with people who are different to us. You know, we're all different from each other. And often that's what often attracts us, that somebody is different. And then it becomes a major stumbling block, because it feels like, oh my goodness, you know, but actually there can be bridges, and it's part of the bridge is the understanding of how the other person ticks and how that's different to you, and so then it becomes about supporting each other in the differences and, you know, in that understanding.
Right, and that you don't have to suffer. And I think that's a new I mean, I don't want to say it's a new concept. I think for many people, it is a new concept. That this is, especially when I'm working with couples who have been together for a long time, you know, they have kids, or they have the empty nest syndrome where now the kids have moved on, of being able to figure out ways to redefine themselves in a loving, gentle way. But I'm sure, just as you see it, when couples aren't doing the work all along, then they wake up one day and there's so much damage that's been done. It takes a long time to heal that, just like anything else. Like, you know, I always make the joke of, if if I want to run a race and all I do is eat fried food and sit on the couch, the chances are I'm not really going to run too well in the race until I make some changes to get my goals, to be able to do that in a healthy way.
And what you're saying also, Patrick, is, you know, we have to do the work on ourselves, you know, to be in a healthy relationship and a happy relationship. If both people are not doing the work on themselves, then, you know, eventually down the road, there's a kind of like a question of, but who am I? I'm losing myself. I've lost myself because there wasn't a me in the first place, or because I let me go.
Right.
So I think sometimes it is about, you know, really each individual doing the work. And I think the astrological chart brings people back to themselves. It's a reminder of who they are. And I think, you know, I often say to people that I'm not going to be saying anything to you that you don't know already about yourself. I'm just reminding you of who you are.
Oh, I love that. That's so gentle. Oh, Margaret, I love this. That just made my week. I can just imagine how supported and loved your clients must feel.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I would just love that, of that gentle reminder that you already know this, because clients are the experts on their lives, but sometimes we get into our own head and we forget our strengths, and we forget what we've come through and overcome, and how many gifts we have that sometimes have just never been nourished.
And that we don't need to be anyone else. We just need to be ourselves, and we just need to be our chart, and that's it, really.
Right.
There is no need. We are not in competition with anyone else. We don't need to be threatened by anyone else, or trying to be, you know, why would we want to have a chart that's different to our own? You know, why would we want to be anybody else? So
Right.
I think it's bringing people back to who we are, and what we're here for, really. You know, we each have different things to develop within ourselves, I believe, on this planet, and that's our journey. We're in our little canoe paddling along, and that's where we need to be. We don't need to be in somebody else's canoe or big boat or cruiser or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just be paddling along, my own little pace.
Exactly.
So one of the other questions I had before we end today is, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your services. I mean, I know you're in Dublin, and, you know, a lot of the people who are watching might be in the States, but, you know, what services do you offer? How could people get a hold of you? What are some of the trainings I've seen you offer? Like, is that open to just astrology students or astrologists, or to anyone?
Okay, first of all, I do chart readings, which are open to everyone. They can contact me via my email address, which is, my main one is graymgt@gmail.com. They can also find me via my website, astrologypsychological.com, or relationshipsandastrology.com. The other thing I also offer is and they can contact me there for individual chart readings, relationship chart readings, and so on. Also, I co-run Astrology Ireland, a meetup group with my wonderful colleague John Byrne and friend John Byrne. John and I do regular meetup groups once a month. Everybody can join the meetup group. You don't need to be an astrologer. We have wonderful guest speakers. We've had Christine Skinner. We've had Chris Mitchell. We've now got the wonderful Anne Ortley from New York this Friday, in fact. We've got Samuel Reynolds, who's going to also be speaking from New York. So we've fabulous presenters at the moment because we're fully online. So take advantage. Usually we're in person, but we're online. And in January 2021, my colleague, Yvonne Smith-Tarnas, who is a psychoanalyst in California, as well as an astrologer, and I will be running an introduction to psychological astrology, which will be a course running for a year.
Wow.
Yvonne is absolutely wonderful, both as a psychoanalyst and an astrologer. So this will be a depth course for anybody who's interested in psychological astrology. They'll get a certificate at the end of it. It will be online, and everyone, again, is very welcome to join. You don't need any prior knowledge in astrology. So that will be advertised on the meetup site, as well as my website. Once we're just finishing off a couple of things. COVID has kind of slowed things down a little bit. We're also planning to run a relationships and astrology course that will be in 2021. We ran one last year. My colleague Armand and I ran one last year. We're putting another one together for the following year. And I also run mentoring groups once a month through Astrology Ireland. Everybody is welcome to join. Those are for anybody who has some knowledge of astrology. And we use them just to look at charts of family and friends, really to get practice, what it means, because it's fine to have all the theory, but what does that mean in terms of looking at a chart? So they're wonderful, forums to discuss charts, to ask questions, and so on. So we had our first one a couple of weeks ago. There'll be another one, another two before the end of the term. Everybody is welcome to join, but again, you do need a knowledge of astrology. Lots of other workshops going on via Astrology Ireland. Also, my colleague John runs a wonderful new moon group every month via Astrology Ireland, which I think you'd all love. He's just wonderful with the moon. And
I can imagine he's a really gentle guy.
Wonderful, wonderful. He's got a great following already. Do book that up because it gets packed very, very quickly. So those are some of the offerings that, are on hold. Obviously, I offer also psychotherapy for couples and individuals. At the moment, that's online. The rest of the time, usually it's mostly in person, although I also work online, but a lot of my clients for that would be in Ireland. So yes, and of course in Ireland you can always go, if you're looking for a psychotherapist in person in Ireland, go to City Therapy in Dame Street. That's where I'm attached to, and there are wonderful therapists there. So
that's great.
I think that's everything.
I mean, God, and so for people who are watching, what I'll do afterwards when I load up the video to my Facebook, and then you'll be able to post it to your social media, I'll also put it on the YouTube of just how to get a hold of Margaret if you're interested. You can write your questions on in social media, and if any of the things that she's offering you're interested in, I highly recommend her.
Thank you. And of course, I highly recommend you for people, in the US. I mean, you're doing amazing work with couples, Patrick,
Thanks.
and I love the group you just set up. That's fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I was thinking one day we should do a Hold Me Tight together on the internet. I think that would be
wonderful.
That would be amazing.
I think now that people are used to Zoom, they're much more open to those possibilities. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun.
And for people who are interested, what we've been referencing is a Hold Me Tight. It isn't therapy, but it's a Hold Me Tight workshop. And so what I've created, I've taken it and I do it through Zoom, and I've created it so it's almost like a private seminar yourselves where you're not using cameras. You can put whatever name you want, like the participants. I just know who's signed up. And then people, when they want to chat, when I ask questions or have issues, they go through the chat, but it's only to me. So if you have an issue or struggle, I can kind of diffuse it a little bit. And people are responding really well to it, where it feels, instead of being able to go somewhere else and that that vulnerability that, you know, I don't want another couple to know we're doing this. It creates this beautiful sense of privacy, and gives you the chance to work on your relationship. So if any of you are interested, you know, patrickmonette.com, you can contact me, and, you know, for the Hold Me Tight workshops.
That's just wonderful. Patrick, is there any last question or anything? I haven't looked at the chat, so you know.
Oh, no, I've been seeing, there's just one more. Michael was saying, must go away, but thank you both for a very interesting session. Thank you, Michael, for joining. And
Michael.
a couple of people on Facebook, Elizabeth was saying it's so amazing to have the astrology tool to help your client with short-term and long-term goals, which, you know, we're talking about today. And Maureen is saying, thank you, Margaret and Patrick, for an interesting discussion. And I hope this is like the first of many, Margaret. Now that we have the pop-ups, there's really no limit to what we can do.
I think this is going to be the start of some new fun adventures together, Patrick.
I agree. And Margaret, thank you once again so much for coming, and for everyone that's watching. And once again, I'll post all the information so you can get a hold of Margaret. And I hope everyone stays safe and has a beautiful week.
You too, Patrick. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.